There's a phone call that may not exist, and depending on who you believe, it either changes everything or proves that this war has already passed the point of no return. Donald Trump said it himself. He claimed that the United States had been in direct negotiations with an unnamed Iranian leader. He said it publicly. He said it with confidence. And within hours, Iran's government looked the world in the eye and said, that never happened. So who was lying? And more importantly, why would either side lie about it? Because the answer to that question reveals something far more dangerous than a diplomatic dispute. It reveals the hidden logic of a war that neither side knows how to end, and both sides are terrified to admit they want to. We are now nearly 4 weeks into what may be the most consequential military conflict since the Cold War. The United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes against Iran. Iran and Hezbollah have been firing back daily. Senior officials have been killed on both sides. Residential neighborhoods in Tehran have been hit overnight. Missiles have lit up the skies over central Israel, and the energy markets, the shipping lanes, the economies of a dozen nations, all of it is now hostage to what happens in the next few weeks. And in the middle of all that destruction, someone, somewhere, picked up a phone or didn't. That's the part no one will confirm. Here is what we actually know. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has been making calls, not to Washington, but to Cairo, Islamabad, Muscat, and beyond. That is not accidental. That is a country quietly building a diplomatic off-ramp, while publicly insisting it doesn't want one. Iran knows that every regional power it calls is a potential back channel to the Americans. And the Americans know that too. Meanwhile, reports have emerged of a 15-point proposal circulating, allegedly from the United States, outlining the terms Washington would accept to pause hostilities. Tehran has not confirmed receiving it. Washington has not confirmed sending it. But the fact that it exists in the conversation at all tells you something critical. Somebody is thinking about what a deal would look like. So let's go there. What does each side actually want? Because this is where the story gets complicated, and this is where most coverage completely fails you. Start with the United States. On the surface, Washington's demands appear straightforward. Halt Iran's nuclear program. Stop the flow of weapons to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, to every armed proxy that has spent 2 decades extending Tehran's reach across the region. Accept verifiable limits on missile development, and do it in a way that is enforceable. Not another agreement that quietly dissolves the moment the cameras turn away. But underneath those official demands is a second layer that never gets said out loud. The Trump administration is fighting a domestic battle at the same time. There's a faction inside Washington that does not want a deal at all. They want regime change. They believe that sustained military pressure will eventually cause the Islamic Republic to collapse from within. And to that faction, any negotiated settlement, any deal that leaves the current Iranian government standing, is a betrayal. That internal tension is not minor. It is shaping every public statement, every military strike decision, every moment of silence when Iran floats a possible opening. The president says talks are happening. His own military and diplomatic apparatus cannot confirm it. That is not confusion. That is a government divided against itself. And Iran is watching every crack. Now go to the Iranian side. And here is where it gets truly extraordinary. Iran's public position is iron. The armed forces spokesperson put it in language that could not be misread. Do not call your defeat an agreement. Those words were not written for diplomats. They were written for the Iranian street, for the Revolutionary Guard, for the hardliners who would view any compromise as surrender. Iran's leaders have a domestic audience problem that is every bit as dangerous as the military one, but privately, and this is the part that almost never makes it onto your screen, Iran's position has always had a price. Iran has never been ideologically opposed to a deal. It has been opposed to a deal on humiliating terms. There is a difference, and it is everything. What Tehran wants, stripped of the rhetoric, is this: an end to economic sanctions that have strangled the Iranian economy for decades. A security guarantee, some assurance, formal or informal, that the United States will not use any pause in fighting as a setup for a finishing blow. Recognition that Iran is a regional power with legitimate interests, not a rogue state to be managed and eventually dismantled. And critically, no requirement to publicly disavow the very alliances and proxy relationships that have been Iran's strategic insurance policy for 30 years. Those two sets of demands are not reconcilable as written, and that is exactly why back channels matter. Because back channels are where the real numbers get negotiated, where the public language gets quietly translated into something workable, where one side can give something without appearing to give it. The question is whether there is enough trust left to even have that conversation. Here is the brutal context. The last time these two countries were reportedly in serious indirect contact, reportedly through Oman, reportedly through intermediaries in the Gulf, the talks collapsed without warning when the airstrikes began. Iran has not forgotten that. The cloud of mistrust that hangs over every potential opening is not abstract. It is specific. It is documented. And it means that every signal Washington sends right now is being read through a lens of deep suspicion, because the last set of signals was followed by bombs, and the bombs have not stopped. Overnight, more explosions over Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, the areas west of the capital. Iran's air defenses are being pushed to their limits, and simultaneously, Iran and Hezbollah have launched what the IRGC is calling their 80th wave of retaliatory strikes into Israel. One person killed, dozens injured. The exchanges have become a kind of terrible rhythm, a daily escalation that neither side knows how to pause without appearing weak. Ali Larijani is dead. He was killed in a joint U.S.-Israeli strike last week. He has now been replaced by Mohammad Baghizadeh, a former IRGC commander. Think about what that signal means. Iran did not reach for a diplomat when it filled that seat. It reached for a military man. That is not an accident. That is a message. And yet, the foreign minister is still making calls. The 15-point proposal is still being discussed in quiet rooms. And a spokesman for the Iranian parliament and a spokesperson for the foreign ministry both went out of their way, on the same day, to say there are no negotiations with the United States. When two officials feel the need to publicly deny the same thing on the same day, that is not reassurance. That is a tell. Because here's the thing about this war that no one wants to say plainly. Both sides need an exit. Neither side can publicly admit it. Iran cannot afford to look like it buckled under military pressure. America cannot afford to look like it negotiated with a regime it just bombed. And Israel, which has its own calculations running parallel to everything else, has internal political pressures that make any ceasefire complicated before it even begins. So what actually happens next? The most likely scenario, if history is any guide, is not a dramatic agreement announced in a press conference. It is a quiet reduction in the intensity of strikes, a pause that no one calls a pause, a message delivered through Oman or Qatar or some third party that says, in effect, we are going to stop doing what we are doing for the next 72 hours, and we would like you to do the same. And then, if that holds, a conversation begins. Not between presidents, not on camera, somewhere quiet with deniability on both sides. But that scenario requires something that is currently in very short supply, a signal that one side trusts the other enough to take the first step. And right now, with explosions still lighting up the night sky over Tehran, with missiles still being intercepted over Israeli cities, that signal has not been sent. Which brings us back to the phone call that may not exist. If it happened, if Donald Trump really did speak to an Iranian official, then someone made a decision that the cost of continued war was higher than the cost of swallowing their pride and picking up the phone. That would be significant. That would be the first real evidence that a door is opening, even slightly. If it didn't happen, if Trump invented it or inflated a third-party message into a direct negotiation, then we are looking at something almost more alarming. A president who is either trying to create pressure on Tehran by implying they already talked, or trying to create pressure domestically by suggesting he has leverage he doesn't. Either way, it tells you the gap between the public narrative and the actual reality of this war is vast. And in that gap, in the space between what leaders say and what is actually happening, lives are being lost, cities are being bombed, a region that was already fractured is fracturing further, and the window for a deal, if it ever existed, is not infinite. The world is watching two enormous forces locked in a logic of escalation, each one waiting for the other to blink first. And somewhere in a room that no journalist has access to, someone is doing the math on what it would actually cost to stop. The question is whether they'll reach a number before the cost becomes something no deal can undo.